Hello everyone and welcome to the finals of the American Cup. We are in game 1 and it's Hikaru Nakamura versus Fabiano Caruana, the two highest rated players from the United States. Hikaru being the only other 2800 player in the world. First one of course being Magnus Carlsen. And they've both had an interesting run, a very tough championship so far. Hikaru beating Abhimanyu Mishra in the quarterfinals and Leinier Dominguez Perez in the semifinals, now facing Fabi, and Fabiano defeating Ray Robson. It was a very long match. They took it all the way and Fabi came out victorious, and then in the semifinals Fabi defeated Levon Arunyan, now facing Hikaru. So let's check it out. It's the first game and it's a very interesting one. I hope you guys will enjoy it. Let's check it out. So Hikaru with white opens with pawn to d4. We have pawn to d5 by Fabi, pawn to c4, pawn to e6, and knight to f3. Fabi goes knight to f6, the queen's gambit declined is on the board, and knight to c3 is still the most popular move, but Hikaru goes for the second most popular in this position. It is g3, opts for the Catalan defense, the Catalan opening. We have d captures on c4, other maybe popular is bishop to e7, and now bishop to g2. This is the closed Catalan, and well, it's just a very standard way of playing. Of course, both of them know this very well. So theory continues. We have pawn to a6, castles, knight to c6, and now knight b to d2. Seemingly blundering a pawn, but not really. Should Fabi capture this, Hikaru would put a knight on e5, and that would be a very strong decision for white, as black gave up a central pawn for the c pawn, and the white will just win it back. Now you don't have b5, your rook will be hanging, and the usual Catalan stuff. So instead, pawn to b5 by Fabi. Now for the moment, it seems like you can exploit this diagonal, but going knight to e5 now, it's not really that big of a deal. You will play knight captures on e5, you will give up the rook on e8, and you will play queen captures on d4, and this is very much playable. I believe everyone would love to play this with black, because the rook really isn't that big of a deal here. You've won a central pawn, you still have your light square bishop, so you can challenge the white's light square bishop, and it's a very nice position. White has to play a4, otherwise it is considered that black is already somewhat better. So instead, after b5, just pawn to b3 by Hikaru. Sorry, that's not, I automatically go pawn to b4. So pawn to b3, pawn to c3, and now knight to b1, going after the c3 pawn, pawn to b4, and Hikaru challenges it with pawn to a3. We have bishop to b7. The only two moves that are ever played here are bishop to b7 and rook to b8, so we are still in known territory, bishop to b7, and now a captures on b4 is the only move that has ever been played here. Hikaru goes knight to e5, this is the surprise, and it is now as of move 11 that we have a completely new game. Where Fabi has to decide, does he go knight to d5 or does he go for something else maybe? So you could go for something like queen to d6, add another defender to that to that knight on c6. You could go knight to d5, also a very nice idea. For example, if captures and they captures on b4, you will capture with the bishop, still having your c3 pawn nicely defended, and then white will challenge the bishop somehow, maybe queen c2, bishop to a3, and at some point you will win that c3 pawn. But after 95, Fabi said, all right, let's go for the immediate pawn to c2, trying to get Hikaru to go for queen captures on c2. If Hikaru would do that, then Fabi could play knight captures on d4, and he doesn't have to worry about his bishop being undefended, because Hikaru's queen is hanging, and once Hikaru moves the queen, Fabi will just trade off the bishops. That's the idea. But after pawn to c2, Hikaru went for bishop captures on c6. We have bishop captures, and now queen captures on c2. Your queen is still hanging. You cannot capture the free bishop here. You might think that you can, but if you capture it, then c captures on d1, you get another queen. So even though you can capture a queen, or you can only capture one of them, so that's going to be a problem. So after bishop captures on c6, we have queen captures, and now bishop to e4 by Fabi. Hikaru moves the queen, queen to b2, and he does it pretty much instantly. I've again allowed the clock times to be seen. Hikaru played it without even spending time, so he is still within his preparation. Fabi goes back, bishop to b7. Hikaru trades once on b4, captures, and goes bishop to d2. Again, not investing all that much time, so we can maybe, draw a conclusion that he is still within his preparation. And now Fabi, although already down to 58 minutes on the clock, invests another 20 and goes pawn to c5. I guess the thought process was, do you trade? Do you go back, bishop to e7, maybe bishop to d6, or do you play pawn to c5, which challenges Hikaru's center, but also defends the bishop on b4. So he has to make it work tactically. And this is the first time Hikaru invests time in the position, while there are some moves that you could consider, like f3 will always be useful because you have to counter that queen to d5, rook to c1 maybe. Hikaru goes knight to d3, also investing some 15 minutes here. And I believe we could say that they are both now out of any known waters of theory. So okay, Fabi goes queen d5. He threatens checkmate. He wants to play queen to g2 or queen h1 checkmate, and Hikaru defends with f3, leaving the option for an e4 to be played in the near future. So if Fabi wants to avoid that, he has to capture on d4. He first trades the bishops. We have captures, and now not c captures on d4. This would allow queen a3, keeping the king in the corner. With the queens on the board, this would be very, very dangerous. So instead, the queen captures on d4, and the queens come off the board. We have captures, and rook f to c1. Now, Fabi has to decide how to, how to continue development, or rather finish development in a least painful way, because rook c7 is coming. That's already going to be very, very unpleasant. Knight e5 is coming, maybe the rook is coming, rook a4 attacking the pawn, maybe rook a4, rook b5. So he is behind in development, but or maybe he can still finish development without conceding too much. So he castles kingside, and now not a rook to c7. That's the choice basically, rook a4 or rook to c7. But rook to c7 would be the poor way of handling things. There's a right way in which order you have to put pieces on optimal squares, and there's a wrong way. And rook c7 would be a wrong one because you allow bishop d5, and now after rook a4, which seems like okay, you still cannot defend the d4 pawn. Rook a b8 will now grab the b3 pawn. So that's the problem. By going rook to a4 first, you prevent any such ideas, because you simply don't have time for that. The bishop is still on the b file, so rook to b8 is not an option, and you have to give up this pawn. Or you can defend it with rook f to d8 like Fabi does, but now you allow rook to c7, and now it's perfectly fine. We have rook to d7 countering the rook, rook captures, knight captures, and only now you capture the pawn. Rook captures on d4, and you've played the Catalan. Of course, you are down a pawn the entire game, and now Hikaru equalized in material, but we could say that maybe he's a little bit ahead in development, or maybe not ahead in development, but Fabi has to find more unique moves at every point of the game to keep the position equal. So he does. He plays bishop to c6, which opens up the b file for the rook, and also maybe bishop to b5 will be an idea in some lines. The knight is nicely defended, so bishop to c6 covers everything. We have knight to c4 by Hikaru, and pawn to a5, keeping the pawn on b3, and on a5 the pawn is nicely defended. We have king to f2. Hikaru starts bringing the king into the game, as so does Fabi. King f8. You have to start playing with your king once we reach the end game, and once you've explored all the other options that you cannot improve your position further, then it's time to bring the main character into the game. We have rook to d6, putting pressure on the bishop, bishop to b5, and knight to a3, challenging the bishop, and the bishop can no longer keep defending the knight. All of these squares are covered, so you have to play bishop captures on d3, but now Hikaru doesn't capture the bishop, he captures the knight. The bishop's still hanging. Fabi goes back, bishop to a6, and now rook to d6, attacking the bishop. And here you should play bishop to b7, like we've discussed in some other lines. And if rook to b6 going after the bishop, you can always bring it back. So that's the point. Fabi decided to bring the king into the game, and now Hikaru plays rook to c6, and it's a little bit different now, because you cannot bring the king any closer. And of course, you also can't play bishop to b7, as rook to c7 check now wins the bishop. So the king on e7 prevents that. King d7 can be played, but it doesn't really do all that much, as rook c5 will win that pawn. So bishop b7, okay, you defend it, but now knight c4, and the pawn will fall. So after rook c6, king to f6 by Hikaru, making bishop to b7 again a possibility, but now rook to c5, going after the pawn, bishop to b7, and now Hikaru does not go knight c4, probably due to bishop to d5. Fabi kind of prepared it, but still after bishop to d5, you will be able to win the pawn. Rook captures on a5, of course now you cannot trade, as the knight on a5 would defend the pawn on b3, and if rook b8, it looks like, okay, now white either is up a pawn or has to be very, very passive if white goes rook a3, but it's not a problem. You can play this, you get your king all the way to defend the pawn, and then you activate your pieces again. Hikaru went the other way around, pawn to e4. You also have to play against Fabi's time. Fabi is down to below 7 minutes on the clock, and pawn to a4. Now Fabi says, all right, if I'm going to lose that pawn, I might as well trade it, but Hikaru says, not so fast, pawn to b4. And what would you rather have, the passed a pawn or the passed b pawn that is on b4? So that is the question here. And Fabi should play pawn to e5 here, or start limiting the mobility of the kingside pawns with pawn to h5. Fabi goes rook to d8, and which is also very much playable. Any move is pretty much very much playable, but some more than others. We have king to e2 and pawn to g5, stopping Hikaru's pawns from going forward. We have rook to c4, now preparing pawn to b5, and rook captures on a4, h5 by Fabi, and pawn to b5, attacking the a4 pawn, where Fabi can defend it with rook a8, but you know, it's that grandmaster thing that I always mention. Once a grandmaster moves a piece, he's not going to move it back and admit that maybe it was better there all along. And Fabi, of course, does the same. He plays pawn to g4, pawn to f4, and now pawn to e5. He manages to confuse Hikaru. The only way to play this for a win is to capture on e5. Captures, you bring the king in, and then you start winning more space. Now the rook can come over and starts collecting on the king side, and so on. Instead, f5 is played. I guess Hikaru plays against Fabi's time here. Fabi is now below 2 minutes on the clock, and it's not easy to find precise moves. Pawn to h4, rook captures on a4, and now h captures on g3, h captures, and rook to h8. Fabi will now go after Hikaru's kingside pawns, knight to b1, and rook to h2. Sorry, that's not an h2. Rook to h2 with check. We have king to d1 and rook to h1 check. Hikaru goes king to c2. He could also go back and blunder the knight, but of course he will defend it. King to c2. And now the question is, what would you play here? It's Hikaru is up a pawn. It's a very dangerous passed b pawn, but he can still you know, manage not to win this if Fabi plays the correct way. Basically, the question is, which pawn do you go after? Do you go after the g pawn, or do you go after the e pawn? I imagine you, much like myself, would go after the g pawn. It's the, you know, I would say the more logical thing to do, because you create the more outside pass pawn. That's, you know, the way I'm thinking about it, and it is the only way to play. You could also continue checking and then go after the g pawn, but rook g1 is the only way to get a draw here, because rook a3 is impossible. If you go rook to a3 to defend the pawn, you lose the e4 pawn with check, and then you're going to lose the knight on b1. So that's the key move. Rook to e1, however, loses. And that is what Fabi plays. And that's, you know, also something that I often mention, that you have to be a really, really strong player to play a losing move in a position like this, because Fabi obviously knows a lot. He is below 1 minute on the clock. That's very relevant, but I guess he calculated something that he can hold. Or maybe he didn't even calculate. Maybe he thought that, you know, he senses the position. I have no idea. But okay, Hikaru went knight to c3. We have rook to e3. Seems like it's the same. Okay, the pawn is defended, but you can still go after the g pawn. But now it is very, very much different. The knight comes to d5 with check, and you have to trade here. If you don't trade, then you blunder the rook. That's the difference. And now you have to give up the bishop. So bishop captures on d5, e captures, and rook captures on g3. But now Hikaru just plays b6, and you don't have rook b3. You cannot put the rook behind the pawn, and you don't have time to go. You cannot put the rook behind the pawn or in front of the pawn. Rook g2 check, king c3, rook g3 check, king to c4, and he was in this position on move 51. that Fabiano Caruana resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. Whatever he goes, if he goes rook h3, simply b7, and once you go rook to h8 to stop the queening, rook to a8, and that's it. There's nothing more to be done here. Or instead, after king to c4, you could also go for rook g1, try to put the rook behind the pass pawn, but obviously that's not gonna happen either. Rook b4, and once you give another check, there's king b5, and okay, you do not have rook to c8. The pawn covers that, b8, the queen is coming, and very soon the black king will get checkmated. So very good game by Hikaru, choosing the Catalan, but also choosing maybe a line that Fabi doesn't know that precisely. Fabi started burning a lot of time here already, some 15 minutes here, and already here he was below the 1 hour on the clock. And here, once he finally had to solve which way does he want to go, does he trade, does he go back, or does he play c5, invested another 20 minutes, and this is what it takes to beat Fabi. You can't just beat him by out preparing him, because in classical, you can't out prepare him. This is what out preparing looks like. He's just going to burn more time, and then he's not going to have enough time to calculate precisely in the endgame, and that is how Hikaru won this very nice game. So okay, Fabi will get his chance. He will now have the white pieces today against Hikaru, and if he can force a win, we go into tiebreaks. If not, Hikaru is the American Cup champion. And by winning this, Hikaru also won some rating points. We haven't checked out the ratings in quite some time now. These are the world top 20 as of yesterday. Let me just improve that. Yeah, so we can check it out. Magnus still first. He won some games for his club Offerspiel, playing in the league. Hikaru also won some points. Like I said, Magnus and Hikaru, the only 2,800 players in the world. Gukesh still chilling number 3. Arjun overtakes Fabi as world number 4 after Fabi lost this game. Then Abdusattor, not a lot of action. Where you lost some points, nothing spectacular. Aravind Chitambaram, after playing that brilliant event, up 8 places, plus 14. That is awesome, 27.45. Also, Anish won some points. Hans Niemann won some points. He's now entered the world top 20. Former world champion Ding Liren, 21, then Quang Liam Le, MVL, and so on and so on. So not a lot happening in classical, but something is happening. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed a very nice little bit by Hikaru. We'll see if Fabi manages to strike back with white today. I would like to wish a very happy birthday to Patrick James, and I would like to thank Rohaho Hostetla, Duncan Weinkohl, Christopher Medema, and David Kasparian for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.